Hello, welcome back to part 2 of our discussion about player skill versus character skill in using this system. I'm Ian.
I'm Steve.
This is the Downbelow RPG, but a lot of things we're talking about can be applied to other games in this subject's case.
So where we paused last time was the really quick question. Go back and watch it, by the way, because that will take some explaining to get to. But the quick question of what happens when players solve problems on their own, using their own skill. How do you deal with that? And we've been talking about times when it's appropriate to actually use our in-game resources and when we can just let it slide. We actually haven't talked much about just letting it slide. We're going to get there in just a moment, because where we left off was the question of if they figure it out without spending all of the in-game resources, for us, successes based on traits, that you expected them to, how can you basically make them pay for it? The first answer that came up was time. Time is a fluid thing, so for the time they spend figuring it out, time passes in the game world as well.
But rather than giving you an explicit answer on how to decide whether to let it slide or make them pay for it, what we're going to do is talk to you about the two concerns that you're balancing in making that decision and let you make the decision. So the first concern, which is directly related to time, is player engagement.
Exactly. Let's face it, gentlemen, the thing that is important here at the table is how much fun and engagement people around the table are having. More engagement than fun, because in the case of entertainment and literature, let's be honest, Schindler's List is not a fun movie. At all.
But you can be entertained, and it is very engaging to your senses.
I'm not saying your role-playing game should be like Schindler's List, but I am saying it is not your responsibility to make sure everyone around the table is smiling, laughing, and happy, having fun the whole time.
Sometimes they will be on the edge of their seats instead.
Engagement is a much better metric to gauge. In the course of these puzzles, if your players are continually engaged by them, and they are willing to spend their time around the table figuring them out,
or even their brain power where they leap to the conclusion successfully,
that's a reward.
And
there.
You should reward them for it, because they will feel good about that, and that will keep them engaged in the game.
In many ways, their whole reward for playing the game is the entertainment, is the distraction, is the engagement. If they're engaged, then you're doing everything right.
And you shouldn't be punishing them for being engaged.
So if they're really engaged and they're figuring it out, and everyone is happy that the time is being taken to go on with this puzzle, and that's what they want to play, let them play it out, because that is content, that is story, that is rewarding. Unless you actually are on a calendar-based time crunch because one of your players has to move to Las Vegas and the other one is flying to the moon on Saturday, you have time. You can postpone the stuff you had planned for tonight for next session. Let the players go.
So the other concern that you're balancing, though, is doesn't letting them get this thing that you'd planned for it to drain a certain number of their successes without draining that number of successes break the economy of the game a little bit? Well, yeah, a little bit it can. And that's why you need to figure out where and how you're going to drain the successes. But we've talked before about the fact that sometimes a success is worth more because you used it at the right place and the right time, or less because you were trying to use an inappropriate success at an inopportune moment. And so narratively it doesn't make sense for the character to get as much out of it. This is very much related to that. If the player's skill, based on a limited number of successes spent from the characters, or even narration that was given without the character spending any successes, has come to a conclusion that is right, whether that be making a speech that actually you, the one who created the non-player characters, think, wow, this would really convince them, or whether that be figuring out a riddle in a situation, or a riddle that was actually asked of them by an NPC, or any of these things that player skill can account for in the game world, then that is the same as the player having a great idea of applying a trait in a situation to the maximum of they hadn't even gotten to the point where you were asking them for the trait, and they already solved it with what they've already done. And then it is your responsibility to shift to a different portion of your narrative where you will challenge them for those successes.
However, we are going to talk about traits one last time before we close this out and move on to the next subject, though.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, not every character is automatically going to have access to all out-of-character knowledge. In the case of Bilbo Baggins, we talked about a couple episodes ago, the famous riddle contest with Gollum. The reason he was able to solve those riddles was because he had the trait folksy wisdom, which enabled him to know these riddles. GMs, don't be afraid to trait check your players. Ask them, do you have a trait that qualifies you to know this, or are you the player the one that's coming up with this? Don't be too restrictive unless it's something highly specialized. If they're trying to repair a nuclear reactor, they really ought to have some sort of nuclear reactor repair skill.
But if they put together that information based on clues that came from your narration or things that other player characters found out and told them, you can be lenient.
This is the equivalent of the D&D circumstance where the silver-tongued player stands up and gives a rousing speech, but the character used charisma as a dump stat and is functionally incapable of motivating people, so it comes out flatter than the dialogue in Twilight.
So, on that note, we're going to proceed to our next time, and you will find out next time when the shoe is on the other foot, when it's the situation which is making you question whether you should ask
charge
them
a success
for a success or not. And we'll just fade out for now and fade back in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for falling through the cracks with us.